Hi, today I want to talk about what I have learned from my eyeshadow collection, more specifically on the action part of the collecting rather than the collection itself as material goods. My train of thought started when I recreated my eyeshadow swatch card. Not only I was able to successfully turn down my desire towards a few palette, through the swatch card I had discovered something else that helped me to see through my minor addiction towards eyeshadow palettes. Here's me gathering all my eyeshadows, getting ready to refresh my swatch card. If you wonder how I did it, I basically used a clear tape to collect the swatch, and then I stick the tape onto a piece of paper. Counting each single unit of my eyeshadows, I have a total of 330 eyeshadows, not including any cream or liquid formulas. So it did take me a couple of hours to complete all the swatches. Let me give you a really good idea how much 330 eyeshadow represents. If we compare the area value of an eyeshadow to a face powder, roughly 5 to 6 eyeshadows would give us the area value of a face powder. So 330 eyeshadows is about at least 60 face powders. Or we could go by gram. Let's say a single pan of eyeshadow would have 1 gram of product. Usually they have a little bit more. And an average face powder would have 10 grams of product. Usually they have a little bit less, but we're gonna go on the safer side. So 330 grams of eyeshadows would give us at least 33 face powders. And depends on the formula of the face powder and how often I use it. I would say at most I can only finish 2 face powders in a year. That means with the amount of eyeshadows I have, if I were to use the eyeshadows all over my face as how I would with a face powder, it would take me at least 16.5 years to finish all my eyeshadows. And let's be real, I don't wear makeup every day, and I certainly wouldn't use eyeshadows all over my face. So the amount of eyeshadows I have would last me beyond a lifetime. I know eyeshadows are marketed for having options, not for its practicality. And there's a lot of people out there, regular people like myself, who have this amount of eyeshadows, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. But for the majority, have what I consider an overconsumption with eyeshadows. It's not that you shouldn't have an exceeding amount of eyeshadows, but just like with that closet full of clothes, if you love everything, wear everything, and you know everything, then the amount is never the issue. But for so many of us, I feel like we would have the amount, but not enough knowing about what we actually have. And that easily puts us in this loophole of searching instead of enjoying. I have been wanting to be really conscious about what I purchase. Frankly, I think I'm doing pretty good, all but except with eyeshadows. I love eyeshadows. Eyeshadow palettes in particular are my weakness. But I think I have cracked the code with some reflecting. Let's talk about the swatch card. Originally, I made this swatch card because I had noticed, even though I was already feeling pretty overwhelmed with my collection, I was still drawn to palettes after palettes. At first, it would attract me, and then that attraction would grow and grow. Usually, it would grow strong enough to knock some senses out of me, where I will find myself falling into that loophole, wanting to take action and resisting myself at the same time. And that will go on for a while, even though most of the times the willpower will take the winner place. Still, I find it to be quite energy consuming, especially if the same matter is going to happen again and again. To make my life easier, I made a swatch card so it can help me to do that reality check, either to restore some of my senses or to help me to determine that I would need that new palette. You know, if I have the shades, then I'll pass. But if the shades are truly unique, that I don't have them in my collection already, then maybe I will consider loosen up a bit and go on with that purchase. Because I had very little familiarity with my collection, seeing all the shades at one glance was a big deal for me. That way I don't have to go back and forth between palettes when I'm trying to compare with the palette. I remember the first palette I de-influenced myself from using the swatch card was the Natasha Glam palette. Then it was the ABH Rose Metal palette. I'm sorry guys, my camera played a trick here with me. I have no idea how I lost a part of my footage. In my recent video, I did dupe the vibe of the ABH Rose Metal palette. It wasn't a perfect dupe because I was only working with my depotted single eyeshadows. But quite positively, I have all the shades laying in my collection. And then I moved on to check on some palette that was a little bit irrelevant at the time, but still was in my mental wish list. Like the Too Faced Born This Way Natural Nude Palette. Just looking at the swatch card, I realized I don't and I cannot need another neutral palette. Like, I have so many of these shades already. This is pretty much my entire collection. It's all neutral. And what's more interesting is I'm not a person who's naturally drawn to neutral eyeshadows. They're not, at least at the time when I was collecting, they're not my first option. They were boring to me. Yet, I wanted that palette. Not urgently, but it's been sitting in my wish list waiting for an opportunity. After de-influencing myself from a couple palettes, I kept on using the swatch card, focusing on trying to find duplicated shades because of my eyeshadow elimination project. Naturally, I just started analyzing the shades that I have and began reflecting on whim. There's 3 things that I learned from the swatch card. The first one, which is the most obvious, I have a lot of super similar shades in repeat. Like if I would go through those similar shade group one by one, filtering them out, only keeping a few from each of the groups, perhaps even doing it with a bit of room for surplus. Very roughly, about 45% of my collection would be left behind, and that is almost half. And the path of reflecting goes, how did I end up with so many repeat shades? Somehow it hits me and I realized I like what I like. I have a style. And that's the second thing I learned. I mean, if you think about it, if I were just buying eyeshadows that I randomly draw into based on what's been released to the market, then I should end up with a wider range of eyeshadows. This is funny because I always thought I liked trying different things that I don't already have. And I never consciously knew what my style is. But I think the reality is, unconsciously, I always knew what my ranges are. And I have simply just been buying the shadows that I love repetitively. For example, with the ABH Rose Metal palette. When I first saw that palette, I felt so compelled to get it. Because that palette has all the shades, pretty much all the shades that I love. And as it turns out, since I love those shades so much, I already have those shades in my collection. But I didn't know I already have them, which leads us to the third thing that I learned. I don't know what I have. I have very little idea about what I own. So it's not that I need another palette to keep me feeling refreshed, complete, or satisfied. What I really needed was to start playing with what I already have and getting to know them. Sorry about the lighting, it got really dark. It's only in the afternoon. This is what we have to deal with winter. Okay, back to what I was saying. I know how different formula offers a different experience, right? And there's always new formula being introduced. But for me, I know very well with myself. If I'm drawn to an eyeshadow palette, I'm genuinely more interested in its color story rather than its formula. And I also think it's quite ironic if I can't even get around experiencing the eyeshadows that I already have, which is so true with me. I haven't really used at least 80% of my eyeshadows, like never used them on my eye. How I might keep on wanting to buy and own new things to try. This irrational desire of mine happens a lot with cosmetics. Believe it or not, in general, outside of cosmetics, I actually consider myself to be quite a rational, conscious consumer. So naturally, this made me wonder, how did I get into this vicious cycle with makeup? I took a deeper dive into reflecting with myself from there. And I came up with 5 traps I get into where I buy things I don't need. The first one is the wipes, like the Pillow Talks, the new Sugar and Spice palette from ABH, or many of the Huda Beauty's eyeshadow palette, like the Naughty, the Empowered. All of those are associated with a wipe, just a wipe, but you do not need any of those products to feel the wipe. But somehow when the product is tied with a particular wipe, the product becomes much more interesting, and owning it is tied to having that wipe. The idea is simple. If the wipe is desirable, usually they are, then the sale of that product would also benefit from that desire. The second tactic is the new, the exciting, the different formula to which might blow your mind or change your life. This is the easiest one to avoid for me personally, but it doesn't mean I don't fall into it, and it's definitely worth mentioning. I don't really care about the new experience and I don't chase with the new releases, at least not anymore. But with the things that are already on, I have the tendency to cherish more about the newer purchases. It's not hard to understand why we have this desire, almost desire, towards new things. The experience of trying new things has its own value. It sparks and lights up different cells in our brain. But that experience is very temporary, and with how fast the market changes today, especially with makeup, we all know how long it actually takes to finish a makeup. It will take you a very short time to try that new thing, but it can take you absolutely forever to finish that product. The third tactic is the trends. The trends. I hate this one so much. Really, you can never be on trend. You can follow the trend, but you would always be behind. It's toxic. It's so unhealthy. On this note, I consider myself lucky because when the short content had took off and started to shower us with all sort of trends, I had already been practicing lullaby for a while. So I don't feel like I was being influenced as much, because I can imagine if this had happened when I was still in that collecting mindset, oh, I would end up buying so many things because they all seemed quite irresistible to me. There was a few products I bought, not this year, last year. It was because they were trendy at a point, and I had the desire to buy them because I see them again and again. For example, with the e.l.f. brow gel. Shortly after trying it several times, I realized I don't really need it. I'd rather not to take that step to use it. And number 4 is everybody has tried it, the fear of missing out. It doesn't matter if it was because of the vibe or the trend or the formula. If you hear it over and over again and you're under the illusion that seems like everybody has tried it, it makes it that much easier for you to give in as well. Psychologically, from a survival point of view, it is much safer to blend in rather than standing out, even though that is not always true. This tactic has gained so much more power with the blooming of short content. It made it possible for a piece of information to reach for a wider range of audience, with or without related interests, which has made it easy to fabricate the deception that everyone knows it. This is harmful in 2 ways. One is that you don't want to miss out. Another one is that since everybody else didn't care about whatever concern that you have from not trying this product, such as money or the environment, then maybe you could do the same. It makes it a little bit harder for you to stand on your ground if you feel like you are not the norm or you have been outnumbered. And the last tactic is the artistic aesthetic. It is true that we all have the desire to appreciate beautiful things. That makes it hard to pass by when we see something that is artistically pleasing. For example, like a nude palette or a matte palette or a colorful eyeshadow palette. When the shadows are grouped beautifully together, it is hard to say no to them, not because you simply like all the colors and the shades, but because they have been put together in a cohesive order. Most of us are not well trained like artists to see the actual difference between 2 similar palettes. That's why sometimes you could buy a palette that seemed so interesting to you, but when you actually go use that palette, you don't know where to start. Like the shades does not attract you individually. This is definitely one of the tactics that I think I fall into the most for a variety of reasons. I don't even know why I would allow myself, maybe I do. I have a lot of dark browns, and I would allow myself to have different shades of dark browns, even though I don't have the knowledge to differentiate the fine difference between all the browns. But I think it's my desire of wanting to have that knowledge. Makes me feel having the shades represents the possibility of me knowing the difference one day. In another perspective is, I know I don't need any more neutral shadows. But if there's another palette with 50 shades of brown that is being put together in a very pleasing way, you bet I'll be drooling on that palette for a bit. That is the 5 tactics I came up with from being fed up with the constant brainwashing information that encourages or reinforcing consumerism. And last, I want to say something with a heavy heart about the word try. Whenever the word try is being used when it comes to material goods, it's troubling because it sends a very misleading information to our brain. It sounds like the action of trying is free. It's very free, no strings attached. And it makes it that much easier to take action. But the reality is, the action of trying something often would lead to owning that something. And trying something is temporary, is much more exciting than owning something. And that's why I constantly hear people talking about trying something new. But 99% of those people will not talk about that product again past the point of trying, because nobody finds that interesting. But that part where nobody's talking about is the actual life. I'm not suggesting to not try things. I'm just trying to point out how the word try plays that little game on our brain that often leads us to a loss. So instead of putting all the focus into trying, maybe balance it out to have some more thought about owning, because it might change your perception towards taking that action. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye-bye.